Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's. What exactly is it? We haven't done it for so long that I'm wondering, what the heck it is. Oh, yes, it's the Monday main event. No, I haven't forgotten. The Monday main event, when we bring together real estate folks and folks that support us as real estate investors. Folks of all kinds, of all persuasions, of all expert capacities to tell us about their end of the real estate investing business. And that includes mortgage brokers and analysts and financiers and lawyers and accountants and designers and anybody we can think of to help us better understand the nuances of various aspects of investment real estate, which is a lot of fun to do. A lot of fun to do. Today, we are really, really happy to have Neil and Rachel Oliver of Clover Properties come on the program. There's Neil, there's Rachel. Hi, you guys. Hey, there they are. Neil and Rachel are an interesting duo. Everybody talks about rent to own, but very few people have been as successful and done as many deals over such an extended period of time as Neil and Rachel. They were both high-level corporate types when they investigated rent-to-own, RTO, and went, wow. Did a whole bunch of work learning about it, and as we all do, doing deals here and there, and got better at it as time went on to the point where it is now a full-time and very wonderful business for them. So their main business has been in Ontario, but guess what? We're in Alberta, and Alberta is, they might tell you, I don't know, I don't want to predict what Neil and Rachel are going to say, but they might tell you that Alberta is right at the moment in today's market, a good place, a very interesting place for RTO. But I just gave such a brief chunk of history. Neil, Rachel, why don't you guys tell us more about who you are? I think it's important for the listeners to know about you.
Well, thanks so much, Barry, for having us. It's always a pleasure. We get to do this every so often with you, and it's probably a highlight for me when we do. I do a lot of the talking when it comes to these types of events. So it's actually fun for me to pass the microphone over to Neil and see how well he gets this elevator spiel. And if he misses anything, I promise I'll step in.
Okay. No pressure, Neil.
It's really easy, Barry. We were both corporate types. Rachel told me to stop being a corporate type and to do something different. And we created this business. And basically, she's been leaning on me the entire time. And here we are, 14 and a half, 15 years later. You're right. We do have a really strong, successful business. We've helped almost 900 families at this point. We've been doing this together side by side for, I want to say, 9 years out of that time. Previous to that, I was ramping up and getting things going. Rach, what have I missed other than I should probably, yes, what have I missed? You tell me.
No, actually, you got it down pat in a nutshell. I think one thing that you forgot is that when we entered this kind of rent-to-own landscape, we very quickly realized there's a lot of misinformation and miseducation around it. So after about 50 rent-to-own deals, Neil and I decided that we need to distill some of our knowledge and experience into a book. And we co-authored a book called The Rent-to-Own Essential Guide for Home Buyers. And the reason we focused on home buyers is because we realized that they are the most vulnerable aspect of a rent-to-own deal, and they had the least information on how it worked. So we put together a book, and I think it's one of the only resources in Canada on how rent-to-own works. And we explain the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then some. And it's incredible to look back on what we wrote, because 900 rent-to-owns later, all of the information that we wrote in that book really applies. And the price points that we're using as an example in that book are actually very reflective of what's going on in Edmonton and Calgary.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. So that means as much as prices have gone wild over the last few years in Ontario, the book is still valid for for Alberta because we haven't quite gone that way. So your examples work out. It's always good when people have examples close to home. They go, yeah, I understand those numbers. It works. So that's a great resource, and good to see that what you did back then as you were analyzing after your 15 deals and came up with your plan and your program and your advice for those home buyers who really are the least knowledgeable when you're talking about, it's the home buyers who need a lot of help. And I guess it's been your guide and served you well over almost 900 deals now. My goodness, that's a lot of deals.
Yeah, even though the content in the book still remains pretty active in terms of how these deals are put together, I will say that we've gotten more content, obviously, because things have shifted and changed so much over the last 14, 15 years. And we've gone through crazy times in the last 4 or 5 years. So now we do the gooder, the badder, and the uglier side of rent to own. So it's kind of interesting, but the premise of the concept of rent to own remains the same.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I never like to presume that folks who have tuned in to the show really understand rent to own. So let's have the view for the layman about what does rent to own mean, and why are you folks interested in the Alberta market when the Ontario market's been so good? So give us some basics and then tell us about the move to Alberta and what's going on here.
That's a great question. So, I mean, I can start and kind of provide some context. Rent to own solves a problem first and foremost. And in our case, the problem is solved for a home buyer who can't quite qualify with the banks. And Neil usually deals with that home buyer's situation and their circumstances. And then there's the other side of it where, rent to own also solves a problem for investors who want cash flow, who want more peace of mind, who want more stability, more predictability, and not have to worry about, volatile tenants or have to do renovations and such. So we're really basically marrying the two. So we've got people who want to get into home ownership, and we have families who want to help enable that process. And then there's Clover Properties. Neil and we essentially are kind of coordinating everybody to make sure it's a win-win for both sides of the equation.
Well, I've always thought that rent to own is such an amazing concept, and home ownership and the ability to buy a home is always of great discussion here in Canada. But I don't think it's ever been the top of people's minds and government's minds and everyone's minds as much as it has been now. And that's countrywide. Home ownership is something people want. It's been tough over the last little while and maybe getting tougher for people to get into a home. So, I mean, it's such a great strategy and so important for so many people right now. So.
Absolutely. And I think Neil can probably speak to a little bit more of what he's seeing in the marketplace and why it helps the home buyer. At the end of the day, for this to be a valid approach to home ownership, it has to truly solve a problem. And part of that is understanding the problem. So I think Neil is actually really great at explaining what that problem is that home buyers are facing.
Okay. Neil?
Well, I don't even think it's one problem, Barry. I think you kind of nailed it. Banks have made life very difficult for everyone to get into home ownership, right? They're looking at credit very differently than they did 5-7 years ago. They're looking at debt differently. Like a car loan 5-7 years ago was acceptable. Now it's not. It's considered against their total debt service and so on. So when you're looking at these types of things, what banks are doing is telling people to come back in 3 or 4 years when you pay down some debt, when you've improved credit. And then what's happening? Well, after 3 or 4 years, prices aren't 400,000 anymore. They're 500, they're 525, they're 550. And the people that under today's stress test could have qualified at 400 can no longer qualify. And what happens? They get priced out of the market. And, in order for them to own their own home at some point in time, they're going to have to move an hour or 2 hours away where the prices are a little bit lower. So in a rent to own, what we do is we solve for that problem by providing the time that they would need anyway, right? If they go to the bank and the bank says, come back in 3 or 4 years, we get them into the property today. They are, they're coming in with a down payment. So number one, there's a bit of security. They're picking the home in our model, which is really important because you got to love where you live. And then you're bringing that home buyer, home owner mentality. So they're looking after the property. And then 3 or 4 years from now, when they've been supported, and we do provide that support, they are credit ready, they're debt ready, they're mortgage ready. And these are sort of the keys that the bank sent them away to fix in the first place. So all we've done is give them a chance to get into the market today. We do, of course, appreciate the value of the property, but very conservatively, and that gets locked in. So there's always a chance, of future equity down the road, which is, who doesn't love that, right? That's something you cannot get in a rental situation at all.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's got so many wonderful aspects to it, and I think a lot of folks who have a peripheral knowledge of RTO of rent to own, they're pretty sure that everybody who wants to be a home buyer on the rent to own side of things is someone who has credit troubles. And so I think we've learned over time that there are many reasons. Yes, lots of people do have credit troubles that need fixing. But I mean, what are some of the examples of other people that want to get into homeownership? Divorced people. They've had home ownership. They're getting divorced, but they don't want to move to an apartment. They want to have a home or keep having a home. New Canadians had homes where they were from before they came to Canada. They would like a home, and the rules for them are tough. New jobs, new companies.
Yeah,
I mean,
self-employed, right?
Self-employed.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to dispel that notion that a lot of people think that it's just people with bad credit who want to get into home ownership. There's lots and lots and lots of other people who have stellar credit, but they still can't qualify for a mortgage.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I would say bad credit so much as challenge credit, right? Like, we're not talking people with 200 scores. We're talking people who have 590, 640. They might be carrying a car loan that is putting them just out of reach of getting a bank mortgage. That is very solvable in a 3 or 4 year term, right? And it's not hard for them to do with a little bit of support. I think one of the biggest problems for people who want to own a home, and it's not specific to rent to own, but a lot of people don't know how to do it, right? They don't know how to repair credit. They don't know how to manage credit. And many people don't know how to manage money, right? They make a certain amount, but they go and spend a little bit more than they make. And then they wonder why they're not in a position to qualify for a mortgage. Well, our school system just doesn't teach this stuff.
No.
And it's something that if they're shown how to do it, then they will be able to do it. And if they're given a bit of a support network and structure with which to work with, and they can absolutely make it happen. And that's sort of the premise of when the banks send them away. Unfortunately, the banks don't send them away with a structure. They just send them away and say, come back to us when you're ready. And what does that mean, right? That to them, they don't know what it means.
Yeah. And even if the bank says, well, you got to pay down some debt. For most people, they don't know within their own circumstances which chunk of debt they should attack first. Does it have to be all right now? Can they chip away at it? When does it have to be done by? What else could I do with my finances? So folks, as you're listening to this, if it sounds like Neil knows what he's talking about on the finance side, well, he does, because he is a qualified, now in Alberta, we call them mortgage brokers. Do you prefer, is it the same title of mortgage agent in Ontario? Is that what you are?
Just a mortgage professional. Yeah, I'm not a broker in Ontario. Yeah. I don't run a brokerage, but I've been doing this for 9 years. And I don't know, I would say I've seen stuff. I've seen some stuff, sure.
Yeah. So Neil knows what he speaks on what the issues are for people who are credit challenged and what it takes to repair them. And that is a very important aspect of RTO. You have to, as an RTO operator, be able to help people and coach them and have them lean on you to repair those credit challenges. And so having Neil with all that qualification is a good part, because that's not Rachel's side of it, Rachel, correct?
Absolutely not. I really don't know what I do. Neil says that he does everything. So I just show up and talk.
You brandish the whip.
Yeah, exactly.
I work faster and harder when Rachel's around.
I'm with you. With you. I would too. I would too. She's Rachel.
I'm
So
going to take
then
that as a compliment, you two.
you must do something, Rachel. What do you do in this whole thing? What do you do?
Well, I think I kind of demystify the numbers for the investor side of the equation. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of, like I said earlier, misunderstandings about how rent to own works and what's in it for the investor side. How do you protect your interests and still enable a home buyer to use rent to own as a path to get what they need? So really, I explain and educate the how the cash flow works, how the overall profits come together. In a rent to own, the profits come to the investor from two places. One part is the cash flow, rent to own properties, cash flow from day one. So you basically take ownership of the property, you close on it, you take title, and you have a cash flow check in your hand. No renovations, no hassles with contractors. That's one of my favorite pluses. And then on the flip side, fast forward 4 years when that home buyer is exercising their option to purchase the property, you're also generating a capital gain. So at the end, they're buying a property at an appreciated price. So your profit comes to you from cash flow and the future sale of the property, and combined, that's where kind of the above average rate of return comes in. And a lot of investors think that profits with rent to owns come from charging higher appreciation, right? That notion of, oh, they're buying at a future date, so that means I can charge 10% annualized rather than try to sell this property on the market for, a measly 6% annualized. And I think that's where the people get tripped up. So I course correct that.
All right. So I want to talk about some of those numbers, but before we get started on that, again, for those people who are just maybe hearing about RTO for the first time, I want them to get the picture here. So we've got someone who wants to be a home buyer and they are credit challenged. They can't get a bank mortgage, but they want to buy a home, be a homeowner right now. So if they want to be a homeowner right now, they have to be able to buy a home. Now, folks who are listening, Neil and Rachel don't go out and buy all these homes for all these home buyers. They find investors. Rachel has mentioned investors. They find investors who are able to buy the home, who can qualify for the mortgage, who can be the person that will sell this home to the home buyer 3 or 4 years down the road. So Rachel's going to, are we going to be able to do some slides or some number chat, Rachel, about how these folks fit together and where the money is to be made, shall we say?
Yeah, I'd love to share some information actually about a deal in Alberta. I do have some slides. I forwarded them over to Donna just because I don't know how to get them up on my screen. So
Okay.
Donna, did you receive them on your end?
I will look right now.
We weren't looking at them, but your business has been in Ontario, and you've been working in Alberta now for, I think, a couple of years. And RTO, I think we agree it works better in a positive marketplace, an advancing marketplace, because if you're looking to buy a property for, say, $500,000 right now, you would like there to be, as you mentioned, Rachel, some appreciation over the 3 or 4 years, and you get appreciation in a positive advancing market, not in a flat market. So with Alberta's current position in the cycle, this sounds like it ought to be ideal for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are looking for consistent and continuous growth. We're not interested in situations where the market does this and then plummets for a few years and then potentially rises again 3 or 4 years later. So what's really been amazing about the Alberta market, as things have become more expensive in Ontario and BC, Alberta is benefiting. Alberta is actually getting a lot more migration. And then, of course, we have a lot of immigration in Canada. So that affordability is being chased by a lot of buyers. A lot of infrastructure is coming in to support that. And it's just creating the perfect storm for that continuous growth in the Alberta market. So we've been watching it very closely for for a long time. We've wanted to be in the Alberta market for a long time, and now we feel that it is going to have that sustainable, predictable appreciation growth that is absolutely necessary for rent owns to be a win-win.
Okay.
But also keeping in mind that Alberta, just like Ontario, and for the rest of for the sake of just making it complete, it's the rest of Canada. We all have credit challenges. We all have new jobs. We all have whatever the situation is that's holding us back. And one of the things also that is starting to become more on the forefront is the price of rent, right?
Right.
You know, I'm talking to people who are renting basement apartments at $5,000 a month, and they could get into a home for $4,500 a month and still be putting money aside and still building equity and still working towards home ownership. So there's a lot of this is also really coming to the forefront, is where rent is becoming so high in many areas across Canada that people are starting to look at what are their other options. And rent to own is becoming just that. It's becoming an option that a lot more people are looking at. And I think you also mentioned, Barry, that a year ago, the Liberal government, regardless of what people think of them, they did mention rent to own as an option for affordable housing. And, you know, although I don't know how much they're pursuing it anymore, I think it's kind of fallen off after they did their bit to try to create some positivity around them. I think it's fallen off a little bit, but the reality is it is still a really viable option for many people to get into a home. And we're starting to see volume in numbers like we've never seen before coming through on phone calls. So people are looking at it, people are taking notice, and you know, it's the same in Alberta. So it's just the perfect storm, like Rachel said.
All right. Well, Donna, how are we doing? I see one of Rachel's slides up now. Rachel, is that your first slide? Hello, Alberta.
Yeah.
All right. So
Just signal me when you want me to switch it.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So what I guess, let's go to the next slide. What I just wanted to touch base on was, it's very opportune that we're talking in March, because earlier this month, we heard kind of the announcement in terms of where interest rates are going to stay. And I think a lot of investors were kind of, nail biting, are we going to see that drop? Are we going to get some relief? And in reality, our government and our banking system wants us to sweat it out for a little bit longer. They said we need to give higher interest rates more time to do their work. What that work is, I don't know, but I don't know that it's good work. I think a lot of us will have a different perspective on what they're doing. So in that context, I mean, it is what it is, right? We can't change where the mortgage rates are. All we can do is, as investors, think about, well, how do we make the best of the situation we're working with? And ultimately, my recommendation to everyone is to think about where they're at, and you can control only what you want to control. Donna, do you want to advance the next one, please? So really, if you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to continue staying stuck and waiting for interest rates to drop, well, there could be, a cost of lost opportunity to you in doing that. So instead, what I urge people to consider is think about what their goals are when it comes to real estate investing. With the context of rent to own, it really allows you that ability to profit with a purpose of helping someone else. And it also allows you to do that with some peace of mind and some time freedom. And for a lot of people, this could be, that piece of the puzzle that allows you some relief and assurances, so that you don't just sit there on the sidelines and get that one damn deal done. So think about what your goals are. When it comes to rent to owns, cash flow can be a big goal for some people. And with rent to owns, cash flow can be anywhere from $350 a month all the way to $2,500 a month. I know that's a massive, massive spread.
Yeah.
And I know, and that's why I'm going to actually show you what kind of a situation gives you that $350 a month, and what kind of a situation gives you the $2,500 a month. So stay with us. And then really, it all boils down to return on investment. You know, when Neil and I got started, we were motivated by the cash flow and the combination of the ROI. And for us, we've been able to generate about 25% annual return on investment pretty much since we started doing rent to owns. And that was back in 2009. And of course, real estate prices were very different back then, much lower. Interest rates were probably hovering around 4%, 4.5%. I don't know. Do you remember, Neil, where we were back then?
No.
No.
Not a chance.
You're the number. You weren't even a mortgage agent at the time. I don't think you even cared about what the difference was between fixed and variable back then.
I'm just wondering if I was even born back then.
You were. So what I was attracted to, and Neil just went along with, was that 25% annualized. And regardless of what the real estate market has been doing, we've been able to evolve the real estate strategy that we're focused on, that rent to own strategy. When you have your, hand on the pulse and boots on the ground, you're able to pivot and adapt and create that consistent ROI. So when it comes to real estate investing, start with thinking about what your goals are, what kind of cash flow you want, what kind of return on investment, and then what kind of day-to-day experience you want. So Donna, let's go to the next slide, please. So here I'm actually going to share a little bit about a live deal that is being put together behind the scenes as we speak, and it's in Edmonton. But before I jump into the numbers, I just want to remind that the rent-to-own strategy that we run is a little bit different than some people may know rent-to-owns in the Alberta market. A lot of people in the past in Alberta might have purchased a property, added some lipstick to the property, and instead of having the typical, tenant challenges, they would prefer to rent to own it instead, so that they get a little bit of a down payment coming in from the tenant and someone who's going to look after the maintenance and the repairs, and then they obviously sell the property at a future date. So what I call those types of deals, property first, people second. And in our experience, we see more volatility with deals like that. There is a lot more turbulence, and I really like more consistent, predictable cash flow and profits. So we ended up choosing to stick to people first, property second. So what that really means is that we're screening a home buyer who needs our rent-to-own program first, determining their eligibility, determining their budget. Then they go house hunting with a real estate agent. They're looking at properties that are on the open market, and they pick the one that makes their heart thump. So Neil, do you want to just share a little bit about the tenant buyer that is behind the scenes on this deal?
Yeah, so this tenant buyer is married. She has 4 children. She's extremely active into many businesses. I think she's also a nurse. And she was renting for well over $3,000 a month, and just decided that her money was going nowhere. She wanted to own something, couldn't qualify because 2 of her businesses are self-employed and she wasn't reporting enough income. However, there was a lot of income coming in. So basically we helped her out. We qualified her for a budget around $440 so that she didn't have to report all her income. She was able to find this wonderful home. It's 3 bedrooms, 2 bath with a basement that they're going to finish with another bedroom for one of her kids. Very active family, and now they have roots, so they can actually, have a secure place to live without having to worry about the rent's going to nothing. Really, is how she put it.
And they're bringing $20,000 down payment to the table. So with rent to owns, we don't have that first and last month's rent. We have a down payment credit, and that down payment credit, for the most part, is the investor's security that this tenant buyer is committed and motivated, because if they don't pay, if they stop paying, as you know, they lose their option to purchase the property at the end of the rent-own term, and they also lose any down payment credits that they've accumulated. So this also helps offset how much money an investor has to put into a deal. So that creates that additional leverage. And as you can see, it's a move-in ready property, and it's a pretty turnkey in a nice neighborhood.
Okay.
So now I'm going to show you kind of two ways of investing in a deal like this. Now, how you structure the deal in terms of purchasing the property really can make or break your cash flow. And that's why I'm going to show you how do we get to that 350 versus the 2,500. So next slide, please. Okay, so when we're talking about leverage, we're thinking about bank financed purchases. And that means, an A lender essentially will purchase the property for you by giving you a mortgage of 80%. Now, I'm using a 6.04 interest rate here, 30-year amortization, and again, 80% loan to value. So that means that as an investor, you'd have to qualify for a $344,000 mortgage. And that's still, a decent sized mortgage, but doable. A lot of investors in Ontario are coming to Alberta because you don't get these types of purchase prices here in Ontario that much, but in Alberta, it's still doable. So in addition to qualifying for the mortgage, the investor now has to also come in with an estimated investment amount. So that covers, the initial 20% down payment, plus all of the closing costs, plus some of the Clover Properties fee. So everything is kind of wrapped into that estimated investment, and it's coming from savings. So $86,139 is really what the investor would be tying up in the deal for the full 4-year term. And this generates about $388 a month in cash flow. And this cash flow essentially is calculated after the mortgage, the property taxes, property insurance has been paid. And also this is a fully managed deal. The Clover Properties team manages the people during the rent-to-own term. And that's really the secret sauce. Rent-owns are not a set-it-and forget-it strategy. That's something that we can chat on a little bit more after the fact. But this is a fully managed deal, and that's where that peace of mind and time freedom comes from. So fast forward 4 years at the end of the rent-to-own process, the investor is going to be cashing in, and they're going to be calculating their profit from those two places that I mentioned earlier: profit from cash flow and profit from the sale. So combined, that profit is going to be around $86,800. So pretty much doubling your money over 4 years in a somewhat passive way. Next slide, please. So essentially 25% annualized return on investment after all fees, after all expenses, using bank financing purchase with a $388 cash flow. So it shows that even in a high interest rate environment, we can still see pretty decent cash flow with standard kind of ROI that we have been able to sustain since 2009. Now, sorry, go ahead.
Those are good numbers.
Yeah, I think that anyone who can still qualify for financing should absolutely be going this way, because obviously you reduce your risk and you maximize returns. So leverage all the way. And when you exhaust your ability to qualify for mortgages, well, then let's look at this set of numbers on the next slide. So this is really more about a cash purchase. So many of us have run out of capacity to qualify for mortgages with the bank. And on top of that, another bunch of us who have been investing in properties more for the long term and building our wealth, well, some of those properties aren't cash flowing, especially if we recently refinanced into a higher interest rate. The cash flow has plummeted, and to cut the losses, it's easier to sometimes just liquidate that property and cash out. And then you're kind of sitting on a stash of cash. Well, what do you do with that stash of cash? Well, of course, you invested in education with Barry. That's step one. Step two, you get ready to do your one damn deal, and you can do it in cash. You don't have to worry about qualifying for a mortgage. So you basically self-fund the deal. So in this case, remember, the tenant buyer has an initial down payment of $20,000, and that $20,000 basically offsets the closing costs and fees from the Clover Properties side to put this entire deal together. So the estimated investment that you're really tying up is just the amount of what it costs to buy this property, which is around $430,000. Now, this is the best part. The monthly cash flow after expenses, fully managed, is $2,443. All of this money is going back into your pocket because you're the bank. You don't have to pay any interest expenses to the bank to profit. This is all of your money, and this is your profit. This is not you returning your capital. Your capital comes back to you when the tenant buyer exercises their option to purchase and buys the property from you. That's when you take your initial capital of $430,000 and put it back in your pocket. The $2,443 is your cash flow, and that's part of the profit line item. So your profit from cash flow plus your profit from the sale adds up to 166.8, which translates into about 10% annualized. Next slide, please. So what you're basically seeing here is that you're tying up your capital. You're in first position, so you have full control of the asset. You are basically getting the time freedom that you would if you were investing in any other passive real estate, and you're generating some pretty substantial monthly cash flow without a lot of the common headaches that come with a rental property. So you're putting your money to work, even in a situation where you can't qualify for a mortgage and still get pretty decent returns, consistently cash flowing for 4 years.
I think there's a lot more people in this category than we all think. Folks who have money but can't qualify. The stats say that there is a tremendous amount of money still sitting on the sidelines and to be invested post-COVID. So anybody who's sitting there going, who's got 430 grand sitting around in their bank account? Well, actually, quite a few people do, and this would be a good thing for them to do with that money.
We're seeing a lot of it. Go ahead, Neil.
Funny enough, Barry, we wouldn't even bring this up if it wasn't coming up for us.
Yeah.
We have more and more investors saying, listen, I want to do something. In fact, we just had a deal in Edmonton. It was a $140,000 condo, and somebody bought it in cash.
Yeah.
And, it was cash flowing. I think it was like $2,100 or $1,900, something like that. But for a smaller purchase like that, it makes complete sense, right? Like,
I love it. I love it.
So instead of paying 6, 7, 8%, because I think gone are those days where in the past it made sense to do a B mortgage if you can't qualify with an A mortgage. But the rates are a little bit on the higher side now that it doesn't make sense. And even in the past, we would kind of combine an A lender mortgage and use our home equity line of credit for the down payment. Well, it's in some cases, in some rent-own deals, we can still make that work. But honestly, when you look at how much money you're paying in interest to the banks, you might as well just be the bank, especially if you're liquidating assets that are not cash flowing and you're wondering how to put that money to work in a secure, predictable way. This is one of those options.
Yeah, no, I love it. Anybody with money in the bank, hope you're watching.
And I just want to, before I wrap up the numbers talk, because I know everyone is at the end of a long work day thinking, oh my God, no more numbers, Rachel. Trust me, I'm not a numbers person, but I love to make sense of information that is going to help us get ahead financially. And that's really where this is coming from. So if we look at the next slide, I just want to kind of do a bit of a what if. So there's a lot of us that are kind of thinking, okay, well, do I just keep my money in the bank? I just cashed out of some investments and I'm going to keep the money in the bank and maybe decide until interest rates drop. But here's the thing. In reality, when interest rate drops happen, even just by 1%, everyone just floods to the market and starts lining up their offers. And what does that do? Well, it makes sellers very, very motivated to ask for more money. So property prices start to go up. So there's never a time when interest rates drop and sellers want less money, right? So one causes the other to go up. So actually, when we ran the numbers on the kind of what ifs, one thing, I'm not going to bore you with kind of the background math, but on the next slide, I basically give you the verdict. Your cash flow goes down and your annualized returns go down, even though you're paying 1% less in interest on your borrowing costs for bank financing. overall, you're actually paying more for that property, even if the property prices go up by 5%, which is the statistical average. Research shows statistically this is what happens: 1% drop, 5% increase in property prices. So in a rent to own, this really has a bit of a negative effect. So, if you're thinking, okay, should I sit around, wait for interest rates to drop if I'm going to go for bank financing? Hopefully this gives some clarity. And remember, what are you comparing it to? Leaving your money in the bank and letting inflation eat up its value? Or are you going to put that money to work and invest with a purpose of helping another family get into home ownership? I don't know. It's a no-brainer to me, Barry.
No, it's a no-brainer for sure, Rachel. And that's a really interesting slide and comment that you made there, because I mean, it's counterintuitive to say that if rates drop, it's worse for you. So I think that's really good for people to understand that if you're interested in this strategy, you don't have to sit around. In fact, it's probably not good for you to sit around and wait for an interest rate drop.
Exactly. And that's it for me on the slides.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I love seeing the numbers. We can flap our gums till the cows come home, but the best is really if people can look at a set of numbers and say, this is a property in Edmonton. Here's what it looks like. Here's the tenant buyer's background. This is what it meant. If that deal is completed now, and even if it isn't completed, how over the moon is your mom with all the businesses, who's a nurse with 4 kids? How over the moon is she about her new house?
So I just spoke with her recently. It has firmed up. So we're just sort of waiting now for closing, and she's extremely ecstatic. She had actually worked, I think, on 3 houses previous to this one. And this one actually is the one she got, but also multiple offers. We were the 4th offer on this property. It was listed for $419 and we got it for $430. Appraisal came in at $430, which the bank will always make sure it comes in at what we purchase it for, never more. So it's a great win for the investor, who is quite happy with it, but it's really a big win for her. Now she has a place to set down roots, like I mentioned earlier, and provide her family with that stability and security, and then potentially an investment later, right? Now she's got something to hand down to her kids, which she did not have before.
So folks, as you're listening to this, Rachel and Neil have talked about the importance of helping homeowners who want to get into home ownership and can't, but also helping investors who want to do something better with their money. I don't want you to underestimate the emotional component of a proper rent-to-own program. It's win-win on both ends. It's win-win to the extreme. It feels good putting these deals together. They're good deals to do, and win-win is always a win-win.
And it's not just the home buyer and the investor, Barry. What we're really doing collectively is enabling real estate agents to do more deals. We're enabling mortgage agents to have a richer funnel of opportunities. And ultimately, lawyers benefit. As
Yes.
you get to write up more deals. And banks, we're really lining up business for the banks down the road, because we're creating mortgage readiness of a bunch of buyers that otherwise wouldn't be able to get in.
In the end, everyone does benefit. I know that here in Edmonton, with with the push for home ownership, people want to buy homes, and it's hard for some of them. I mean, the notion of rent to own has gone from something that was talked about in sleazy bars where it was rent to fail deals, not rent to own deals, to the point where, as you mentioned earlier, Neil, the government of Canada has talked about rent to own. I think the government of Ontario talked about a program. CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, understands rent to own, and they have their own rules, but they understand it. And they're not opposed to a proper deal. Last weekend here in Edmonton, the Edmonton Journal, in their real estate section, had a big article, and in there rent to own was featured as a strategy that was going to help some people who couldn't buy but wanted to buy. So the strategy has, to an extent, I think, been rehabilitated. I think a large part to your hard work and many successful deals. But that is also something important for people to understand. That rent to own is a valid, understood across Canada strategy. It doesn't just work in Ontario and in Alberta. It works across the country, and it is something well worth learning about. And the two best people in Canada to learn about it from are Neil and Rachel, Clover Properties. Now, how can people get hold of you and kind of explore this further? What's the best thing for someone who's interested?
Well, anyone who's interested in exploring the investor side of it, then all you have to do is just visit hellocashflow.ca, and you can connect with me there. And just more general information is available on our website at rethinkrenting.com.
Okay. So that's hellocashflow.ca. And what was the website name again, Rachel?
Rethinkrenting.com.
Rethink Renting. Rethink Renting. Boy, you've got really good names for how people can contact you. They're descriptive just in the name. That's good. I like that. Think what the content will be, folks, if the name is that good.
We have a couple of questions.
We have some questions here. Let's have a look here.
Right, no,
Right there. So you're looking in the wrong place. Paul says, do you need to involve a mortgage specialist or broker to underwrite an RTO? Neil?
Yeah, so funny. We were just talking about this today, and there's a lot of talk here and there about different programs and how successful they are. And our discussion was basically, this is where you make or break a rent to own, right? Because you've got to have number one, they've got to have the right fit. They've got to have the right mindset, which is critical, but they've got to have the right income, and they've got to have repairable credit. So it's really beneficial if you could use an underwriter, a mortgage underwriter, or a mortgage professional to do the underwriting for you, because they'll be looking at things like, how logical is it for them to exit in 3 years versus 4 years? What kinds of things will they need to repair on their credit or pay down on their debt, right? As well as sort of structuring that monthly payment around whether or not they can actually afford it. Because number one, you want to use the stress test. That's critical, right? They've got to exit into a bank mortgage. So if you're not qualifying them on that right up front, then they're probably not going to be able to get a mortgage. So if you don't understand how the stress test works, a mortgage professional is a great person to access and to have help with that. Number two, the affordability aspect. Even though they can afford a $600,000 house, it doesn't make or break their payment in terms of what they can afford there, right? They might only be able to afford $3,000 based on the debt they're carrying and the, how much debt payment they make each month. So having somebody who understands that angle as well is extremely important. So this has been sort of the crux of why I got my license many, many years ago. And we've now hired somebody on our team who is an underwriter as well. And now she reviews the paperwork and helps support as well. We found that it's probably one of the most positive aspects of doing a rent to own is when you have people who are knowledgeable and experienced in getting people to the end and being able to qualify them.
Okay. I'll second that all the way, Neil. I would never, ever think about a rent-to-own deal without having it looked at by a solid mortgage professional who really understands rent-to-own. So in full support of everything you said, ×2 for sure. Next up, another question. Do you do RTO on rural properties? Good question.
So we do not. Okay, so there's a few things also because, as a mortgage underwriter and as a mortgage professional, I'm looking at, number one, how easy is it going to be to fund the deal, right? Even if an investor puts his hand up or her hand up and says, I can do this, it doesn't necessarily mean the banks will, right? So the banks, as tough as they are with people who just want to buy their first home or their second home, they're also tough now on investment properties. So really funny story. We were looking to buy a house in the GTA, the Toronto area. The house was owned and for sale by a bank. Okay, it was a bank sale. And the house needed 40% work done to the property. Do you think the bank would give a mortgage on that? They would sell it in a heartbeat, but they did not want to remortgage the property.
Yeah.
And the rationale was we want 40 to 50% down to take on the risk of whether or not this property gets completed. So we have found the same type of risks to be in rural properties where some banks don't want to touch that. And if they do, they want 30, 40, 50% down, which obviously in a rent to own is over leveraging. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's the reason we don't get too involved in rural properties, just simply because it becomes harder and harder to fund them.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's just too much risk on the rural side. Not that you can't do them. It's just a bit risky, certainly for my level of risk.
Oh, sorry. One thing I just want to point out is, the rent-to-own strategy in the past kind of was making false promises that you can rent to own your dream home. And for some people, that means it's a rural property. They want to own, land, acreage. And I understand that, but rent-to-own is a strategy to help you get your foot on that property ladder. It's your next move. It might not be your dream home, but it allows you to get closer to it. There's no guarantees, obviously, but there's, if you stay renting and just try to leap right into your dream home, I think your dream home will be like a moving goalpost. It'll continue to get further and further out of reach. But if if you're a home buyer and you jump in and you kind of get your foot in the door, improve your credit, build up a little bit of equity through the rent-to-own process, get a little bit of traction. When you're done the rent-to-own process, you'll be in much better shape, and then you can leap over to kind of the next best property.
Yeah, that's good, Rachel. I like that. And do we have any more? Paul again. Paul, you're on fire here. Can you please clarify how much the potential homeowner has to come to the table with? Good question.
For us, we're looking for 4 to 5% down. Now, some people will say, oh, well, if I have 4 or 5%, I can just get a mortgage. The reality is that's not really true. So the banks will probably qualify most people who aren't perfect credit and no debt with 10% down. So what we call it is getting into rent down with less down than the banks would be looking for today, rather than having, because again, no down is not an option for us either, just in case that question pops up. We do not work with no money down simply because the failure rate, in my opinion, in my experience, has been very high. We have never done that, but I do have people who phone who get involved in rent-to-owns where there's no money down and they're paying $6,000, $7,000 a month just because that investor wants to offset their risk, which is not sustainable for anybody. So with us, 4 or 5% allows people to get in. It gives the investors a bit of security, and then it also allows us to keep the payments more normalized, right? Because the bottom line is you want to, as part of your rent-to-own program, build them up in their down payment to close to 10%, right? Because if that's what the banks are looking for, you want them to be able to exit with 10%. So the more they start with, the less they have to contribute monthly.
So Paul, that's how Neil and Rachel do it, and I fully agree with all of that. Now, it doesn't mean that if folks have more than 4 to 5%, that you can't have a larger down payment. In fact, it's better all around for the investor and for you if you're running the program to get 10% down or 20% down. Sometimes people have lots of money and they're anxious to put it into their property. So the larger the amount of money that they put down, the more secure the investment is, because the more they are committed right out of the chute to home ownership. They're far less likely to run away from a plus 10% down payment than they would be from a 1% down payment. So 4 to 5 works solidly, and that's the rule of thumb for Neil and Rachel. But if you can get more money, that's good too. Any more questions, Donna?
That's it.
All right. Those are the questions for today. What about some closing remarks, you guys? Are we hitting everything that you wanted to say, or one more? Just a second. Where is it, Donna? Where is it? Can you please write your website for people who want to rent to own, please? Yes, we'll pop it in there, Donna.
What was the other one?
Rethinkrenting.com.
Rethink Renting. Donna will use your magic fingers. I mean, I guess I could type it too.
Yeah, it would be a lot easier.
I mean, I can type 50 words a minute, Okay. I dictate my stuff though,
You
because I can
don't, but
talk
you
150.
Yeah, rethinkrenting.com. Okay.
How are we doing? Rethink
Just about,
renting.
just about.
There we go.
You
no,
can talk. You don't.
no extra spaces. We like to watch you do this, Donna.
Hide.
Donna just
Oh,
had her nails done. I can watch her new nails. All right. So that was the last question. Closing remarks.
So I think one of the elephants in the room that is worth addressing is, what happens if the home buyers don't pay? What happens if, they can't exit? Is this designed to, basically 2 hours late with a payment and you're out? I think a lot of people have that misconception about rent to owns, and that's the furthest thing from the truth, right, Neil?
It is.
I'm just thankful. I thought you were going to go down that path that I was the elephant in the room. So thank you for.
No,
I was like, no, elephant in the room. Here we go.
the teddy bear in the room. But seriously, I think it's worth just very quickly addressing that misconception that the investors that are behind the scenes assisting these home buyers through our program to get into home ownership, they are not here to harm anyone. They're not here to kick anyone out. There are processes and standards to protect the families that are in the rent to own program. Obviously, they have to stay accountable. Obviously, they have to pay on time. And that's really all they have to do. One job, just pay on time for 4 years and you'll become a homeowner, and the program will do the rest. But life happens. Sometimes people are late. What happens if someone is late with a payment, Neil? What do the investors or the home buyers have to expect?
So I would say 98% of the time, if somebody is late with a payment, they're usually communicating why. They're usually letting you know that it's not going to come tonight, but it's going to come on Friday, for example, or Thursday. That's communicated back to the investor. And then the investor can decide the next steps, right? So if they're communicating, then the investors are usually like, that's fine. Let's just get this in when they're getting in. What we typically will suggest is you keep one monthly payment in the bank at all times, just in case, so you're not scrambling. But if they don't pay on time, then we do go through the landlord tenant board, file an N4 for non-payment, which gives them 14 days. Usually they catch up within that 14 days with no problem, and we're back on track. Again, life does happen. COVID, nobody saw that coming. That created a whole world of creative challenges, and we were able to navigate that. So I'm pretty confident that we can navigate through anything. There's a solution to every problem. Communication is usually the best way to create a solution that's going to work for everybody.
Okay.
Last question.
And Paul has one more question for Rachel. I think you alluded to, what if after 4 to 5 years, the buyer still can't qualify? What happens then?
So I think as long as the home buyer has been dedicated and committed and paying on time, it's really a function of figuring out how do we assist them. And usually that assistance comes in the form of an extension.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as they've demonstrated full-on commitment and have complied with their side of the contract, then there's really no reason why we wouldn't help them by going to an extension. And extensions are actually very, very common. Neil, you deal with a lot with extensions as well.
Well, they're not common per se. I mean, they are used quite a bit. We do offer them. They are beneficial because it gives you another year of appreciation. It gives you another year of principal pay down, and it gives you another year of cash flow. Right. So in many cases, especially at today's interest rates, we're looking at smaller principal pay downs than we might have looked at 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when interest rates were lower. And what's happening now is because you're into that 4th and 5th year, it's an extension year, you get a bit more principal pay down than you did the year before, which obviously becomes return for any investor that might be offering that extension. So we always look at extension first. As many extensions as we offer, we also have people who buy early. right? So you got both sides. You get people who work really hard. They get to the end. Something has come up that they just weren't able to foresee, and they need a little bit more time. But on the flip side, you get people who accelerate right through the program. They work really hard at building up their credit. They work really hard at qualifying for that mortgage, and they do it in 3 years instead of 4. Right? It's still amazingly lucrative for an investor, but it shows that there's two sides to each story. And where there's a situation where somebody doesn't want to pay and they don't work very hard at it, then by no means would we want to offer that extension. And you try to do a buyout, right, where you might pay them to move out.
Yeah. So what folks, as you're listening to this, the whole goal of a program like this is to qualify people as best you can, and to train them as much as you can, and to have as successful a percentage of RTO deals as you possibly can. There will always be circumstances where no matter what you do, it just isn't working out. And the program deals with that as well. So what you're looking to do is increase, to a large extent, the chances of a successful conclusion, because that's what everybody wants. It's great for the homeowner, it's great for the investor, and it's great for Neil and Rachel. Well, look at that. 6 o'clock, as we say in Spanish, en punto. 6 o'clock en punto. I love that. Now, it's only 6 o'clock and we have to stop if you guys have said what you need to say. Anything else?
I think we covered the gamut. I mean, you've asked a lot of good questions. The audience asked some great questions.
I think I really feel good about it. I love talking about rent to own, and I feel good about talking to you guys because you know it up, down, and sideways, and you know the answers to all the questions, and you explain really well. So I just throw up softballs and you guys hit them out of the park. This is the best part for me as a host to this program is interviewing folks like you who know what's going on. So thank you very much for coming on and telling people. Everybody, if you want to know more about rent to own, we've given you the websites in the chat. Contact Neil and Rachel. Get going. This is a good one.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Donna.